The purpose of this documentary film is designed to depict a visual and oral history of my combat and flying experiences, as well as some of my personal achievements while serving this great nation as a career Marine Corps officer. I wanted to share my colorful experiences as a living history with folks I know would appreciate having a chance to literally see events that I and many of my warrior friends experienced by producing and providing a combat video legacy of Vietnam in 1966 and 1967 for all my children, as well as my wife Julie and her family and her wonderful extended family. Also, by providing video copies to very dear friends who have made my life so meaningful. And lastly, for recovering and refreshing the lost memories for those squadron mates still alive and for the families of deceased loved ones who served with me in Marine Fighter Attack Squadron 542. Personally, this video is my baptism of fire. Through this experience in 1966 and 1967, I found my professional intersection and subsequent direction. I wanted to pursue a Marine career and contribute. I needed to consume every facet of combat flying to master the technique in destroying our North Vietnam enemy. My focus served me well in my succeeding tours in Vietnam in 1969 and 1970, and in the Lebanese Civil War in 1976 and 1977, where as a more seasoned Marine officer, I had to make life-threatening decisions in order to save my comrades and complete my given mission. What you will see in this video is a chronology of events which tells my story of Marine Fighter Attack Squadron 542 from June 1966 through June 1967. During this period, I flew 270 combat missions. It starts in Da Nang, Vietnam, and ends in Chu Lai, Vietnam. It portrays the primitive accommodations we had, albeit not half as bad as our infantry Marines. It'll show you the 542 flight line operations and how these amazing Marines made sure we were flight ready every day and every night. It'll show you the tropical weather we endured during the monsoon season, as well as the weather conditions while flying. This is a great group of patriots that put their lives daily on the line. God bless them. When I came to Da Nang, Vietnam, I was assigned to Mag 11, and these are the quarters that we had. After this picture was taken that night, we were hit by a sapper platoon, which is another story for another time. This is the area for Marine Air Group 11. That's John Wayne there talking to us about how he was there to film the movie The Green Berets. It was back in 1966, and these are the Marines, and he's talking to them. You can see the rifles sticking up because we were always under constant sniper fire and so forth. And this is the street that we had. As you can see, the Marines with their weapons still on them as they're going about their business. These aren't infantry Marines. They work in aviation support, or they're on the ordnance line, or they're putting together the electronic equipment we had, or maintaining the engines and the aircraft structure and so forth. That's Skip Greenfield. And here I am. This is my introduction to Vietnam. I probably had about 2 or 3 flights when this was taken. This is out in Dog Patch, we call it. It's right outside the gate, and you can see the people and some of the activity was going on. That kid walking down the street with his rifle and a 782 gear probably didn't have it at the end of the street. If with those kids around him, they knew how to rip off everything and anything. But that's a primitive condition. And here we are at the base. This is right outside the base, and these are the living conditions that they had, which were primitive by our standards, to say the least. But this is where George Payne was assigned. George is Jim Masiello's cousin, and there's continue the scenes at the place. George came to see me while I was at Da Nang, and we had a long talk and so forth. But this is Dog Patch, and you can see all of they're trying to sell whatever they can sell around there. And this is the flight line of 542 at Da Nang. And here's the taxiing out. We're going by Air Force F-4s that are on their way up to North Vietnam. And here we are. We're going out on a close air support mission. I was on the hot pad at this time, and we got a call that we needed to go out to help some Marines that were being ambushed. And coming back into land at Da Nang, and I'm trying to take. My father wanted me to take pictures of us landing, but it wasn't a comfortable way of for the camera and so forth. Here we are taxiing back in. We're going by the VNAF, the Vietnamese Air Force, their establishment there, and they had none of their planes. They had planes there, but none of them were flyable. I don't believe, because I never saw them in the air, except for one, and I'll show you that later. But we're traveling now down the runway to our 542 flight line, and you can see some of the hangars. Those are old hangars that the French had, and then the Air Force took them over. And all this area is pretty much dominated by the Air Force, except for the Marine Corps. And there's a Freedom Bird, as you can see there. Freedom Bird was taking you back. That's a Puff the Magic Dragon. And here's Don May. He had just come into Vietnam. He was a commanding officer of our squadron, and I wanted to have some pictures taken with Don, so he wanted to elaborate for the camera and so forth. And this is right outside the gate at our Air Group headquarters, and you can see Dog Patch, and they got barbed wire up, which didn't help too much. And you can see also some of the equipment that we had around there. You're going to see a surface-to-air missile that we have, the Hawks, they called them, in case we were attacked. This is all the traffic coming in through the gate there, and you can see it was pretty well. There's a Hawk. There's the only Vietnamese Air Force plane I saw in my entire tour. There's an aircraft, F-4, one of our aircraft, with carrying a gun, a Gatling gun, and rockets, and two 250-pound bombs. At this time, McNamara was saying that we had no problem with ammunition, but we did. We were going up in 500 miles up into Laos with 4 250-pound bombs, and that's all the ordnance we had. You don't see much ordnance out there. You'll see a lot of ordnance when we get to this film on Chu Lai. That's Monkey Mountain up there in the background, and here are some of the ordnance that we had. We used, generally the ordnance was 250-pound bombs, 500-pound bombs, and Snake Eyes, napalm. And that's an Air America airplane taking off there. They belong to the CIA. Here we are taking off again. This is an Associated airplane. There's an Air Force plane taking off for North Vietnam. What you're seeing here is out south of Da Nang. I went out to see our neighbor, Norm Labauty. That's Chris's godfather. Norm was in the Korean War, was hurt, and he stayed in, and he's now I believe a captain at this time. We saw him. But this is out in the 3rd Engineer Battalion, about 10 miles south of Da Nang. And going out there, I didn't have my head on straight. I shouldn't have gone out there. I was thumbing out there, and that whole territory out there is Indian country. There's Norm right now. Great guy, wonderful person. And here's the rugged terrain that you can see out there, and you'll see more of it here in a second. You'll see some French fortresses that they had out there on the ridge line. But this is all constructed by the 3rd Engineer Battalion. There's the fortresses I was telling you about, those towers. Now we're at Iwakuni. I was after being in Da Nang for 2 months. They transferred the entire squad, swapped the entire squadron out from another F-4 squadron in Iwakuni, and they sent us back there. The idea was that we were supposed to take all the new guys coming in and update them on what was required of them in country when we went in, and also to refurbish their aircraft that they had, which was something else. This is MAG 15, change of command. That's a colonel position, and the air group was Marine Air Group 15, and they had F-4s and A-4s in that air group, along with a lot of utility vehicles, TA-4s and C-47s. So we're going through. This is a normal ritual that occurs when you have a change of command in a big organization. And He's just passed the flag to the new group commander, and then the adjutant takes over. And then they have a pass and review. And what you're seeing now is the pass and review. You're going to see Don May and his in 542 come through, Marine Air Group, Air Squadron, Fighter Squadron 542 coming through. Next will be Don May's Marine Fighter Attack Squadron 542. There he is right there. Great guy, great leader. He did a great job with us and kept all us wild Indians together, which was something else. He started out as a flying sergeant in World War II, made lieutenant in Korea, and now he was a lieutenant colonel. Here I am on the flight line. My position was the line duty officer, and there's Skip Greenfield. Skip was from Holy Cross, and there's several people. There's Al Griggs. Al Griggs was from the academy. He lived in Northfield, Massachusetts, about 50 miles down the road from me, where I lived in Keene, New Hampshire. There he is getting in the aircraft. Terrific person. And this is taxiing at Naha Air Force Base. And now we're just out on a training hop. This is not combat. Here at Naha, at the bar one night, I ran into a school teacher that I went to school with at Keene State College, and there she is with Denny Dwyer. I played football against him at St. John's in Concord, New Hampshire. Denny graduated at the same time I did, and Pat and Denny went together for the entire time that I knew her at Keene State College. Meeting her there was awkward, to say the least, because I was with all my wild hellions. We were practicing aerial refueling. Aerial refueling, I thought was pretty tough to do with the refueling probe comes out on the side, and you have to use your lateral vision to pick up one to punch into the basket that they had laid out there. Some people had a real tough time, but they really got it. If they were low on fuel, they didn't have as tough a time, it seemed. But we had all the guys who were coming back that we were flying with. They had just come over from the States, and they'd probably taken their 30 days leave before they came over, so they were a little bit off the mark and doing what they needed to do. But this is all training, and this is what training is for. Didn't have any trouble once they got into country and had to use the refueling if they had to. What you did was you flew a section up above the refueling tanker, and then when those who were on the tanker moved out, they moved laterally left down below, and then you kind of slid in to refuel, and then did the same procedure, backed out and went down to the left. And this is all. You can see the weather is real clear. This is all, at that time, all over in August of 1966. Those are A4s and an F8. And that's Larry Bacon, and there's myself acting like a 2-year-old jumping around out here. We were getting ready to go back into country. This is in October now of 1966. And one of the guys had a car. They had bought a car, and he used it for 2 months. Now he didn't know what to do with it, so we were going to help him out with it by running up over the top of it, denting it all in so he could sell it as junk. That was Leo Cullum, and there I am, not as agile as Leo or Larry Bacon, who you'll see here in a second. Again, this is looking at some of the structure at Iwakuni. These were built, I believe, in the late 40s, early 50s. They used steam heat, and you can see the towers over above, but the buildings itself were made of aluminum, hot in the summer and cold in the winter. They just sucked up the anything that you were pretty well unfortunate to have to be there, dressed well. There's Larry Bacon and Leo Cullum, two great guys. Leo was from Holy Cross also, and Larry was just a cut-up. And Leo, he had a great love for the camera, and he was always taking pictures. When he got out of the Marine Corps, he went to work for Trans World Airlines, and whenever they laid him off, he had such a sarcastic way of doing things. He went to work for the New Yorker, drawing satire cartoons. There's an A4 taking off. That's the plane that John McCain was flying when he was shot down. These are Japanese airplanes right here taking off. This is an F-86 that's taken off in a section takeoff. And the F-86 was very dominant in the Korean War. That's the MiG killer right there. They look somewhat like MiG, but they outperform the MiG enough to with aggressive Marine and Air Force pilots. They were able to shoot down all that they needed to shoot down. I think their ratio was 10-1, 10 MiGs to 1 American airplane. This is the F-80. Now this is a training type F-80. It's a Japanese with you can see this rising sun on it. That F-80 was it didn't do well in Korea. They had it in at the start of the war, but it didn't do as well against the MiG. This is an F-4 taking off. I believe he's going out in a maintenance test flight. He's in afterburner right now, and you'll see him come out of afterburner when you see the black smoke. That was also a telltale sign that the North Vietnamese could follow. If they saw we were in burner, they couldn't see any smoke. This is Dick Bardo. Dick and I went over to Vietnam together. In fact, we came back together, and we lived in the same hooch together in Chulai. But we're on the range right now. What they decided to do was that we knew we were going into Chulai, and we had to stand runway duty officer 24/7. And the problem with that was that we needed to be armed because the first 100 yards of the runway at Chulai was Viet Cong territory at night. They penetrated us quite often. So if we were out there by ourselves, standing as runway duty to make sure that the airplanes come in and had their gear down, and etc., we had to be out there for it. So they armed us with these grease guns. We had, when I was in my former life in the Marines, I was a tank officer. We had grease guns in the tanks in case we had to use them if we had to get out of the tank. But anyway, this is all. These are A4s coming in, and again, here's Dick up. We're shooting in a standing position, and he's firing about 3 or 4 rounds per squeeze. That gun, if you just held it down, would rise up into the air, and it had a tendency to jam also. But if you gave it a little bit of love, squeezed it about 2 or 3 times instead of holding it down, you had pretty much accuracy out to about 25 to 30 yards. And this is what we had down here in this range at Iwakuni, Japan. And there I am with my camouflage flight suit. Those camouflage flight suits were bought in China. And so we had they gave one to each one coming into the squadron, and I got mine in late May, early June, and then you'll see others wearing theirs whenever the chance would appear. And but they had no fire retardant capability. I mean, if it caught on fire, it would just you'd be smoke. But it looked sexy, so that's what we wore, and the commanding officer didn't have any opposition to it because he was wearing one also. So here the F-86 is coming back into land from that takeoff that you just saw. And again, they're in precision, and you'll see it's about a 1 potato, 2 potato. Here's Leo Cullum, and we're on our way, Leo and I, Rick Lewis, and I can't remember his backseat, we're on our way to Chulai. We were going to be the first F-4s landing at the Chulai in late October, early November of 1966. And we're at Subic Bay, and you can see the area. It was QB Point was the Naval Air Station. You can see the aircraft that they had at the time there. These are planes off the carrier, and they were up on Yankee Station, which is going into North Vietnam. We're now in Chulai, and we're taking off. This is a section of F-4s taking off. You're going to see the first one taking off here. The second one will take off 10 seconds afterwards, or 10 potatoes. And We go take off in burner. We're loaded with, generally speaking, at this particular time, with a close air support ordnance. We could generally carry you could carry about 12 500-pound bombs on here if you're going out on a TPQ-10, which I'll talk about later. But here we are. They're getting ready to launch an aircraft, and they've just unplugged them. We had to have an external electronic starting unit. He's carrying 2.75 rockets on there, and this is for close air support. And there's a huffer. We call it a huffer because that's what gives air to the engine to have the engine start spinning so that they can ignite the starter. That's a ram air turbine in that red section there. If we lost our electronics, they'd stick this thing out. It was like a windmill, and that provided us, generated the electricity we need for all of the needed equipment, needed the engine and for electronic for coming back in. There's John. There's a plane. A section of A4s taking off. Again, A4 is what John McCain was shot down with. In fact, about this time in 1966. But you can see the weather. It was heavy overcast, and it doesn't show the rain. And obviously, this was a day in which it was partly cloudy, and we had some sun shining through. As these planes take off, we have planes coming in, and you'll see them. On the end of the F4, when you landed, the first thing you called was shoot. And they put out a drogue chute, and that was to slow you down. And if that didn't help and you were still going like a scalded ape, you would drop your hook and take an arrested landing at the end of the runway. But here's a section of F4s taking off on a combat mission. And this is out of Chulai. And this is during the early part of it, and you'll see here shortly some of the equipment they had and some of the rustic way we were doing things. As you can see, we have no revetments around these aircraft right now, and well, I'll say take that back. There's the start of some revetments. And you can see planes landing, and we're taxiing. This is in the taxiing mode. As you can see, I'm trying to hold the camera as steady as I can, which is rather difficult, and there's a picture of me. And I get my clipboard and the equipment that I had in the aircraft as a radar intercept officer besides navigation. There are the helpers that we had. Over in the western side of the Chulai was a mountain range, and at the foothills there was a cement factory and run by Americans. So the Americans kept the Viet Cong occupied during the day by letting them work in the cement factory or here at Chulai, building up the runway and the taxiway. And at night they were the Viet Cong, and we were having all kinds of fun. But there they are digging out trenches and putting in underground pipelines and so forth. This is business as usual during the formative stages of the Chulai base. And we've got all kinds of ammunition and ordnance right down there on the runway. That's a TF-9. It was used to fly observation for the Navy battleships who were off the coast off Yankee Station firing into North Vietnam. They'd go in there and do an assessment on how well the ships were targeting and hitting their North Vietnamese targets. This is a primitive hangar that we had and some of the primitive equipment that we had in. And I'm just showing you inside the hangar itself. And seat shop, ejection seats. And this is later on at Chulai, and I was with Woody Woolridge, and I believe Woody is from the D.C. area. And we're going out, we're carrying Snake Eyes. Snake Eyes, the bomb, when you drop it, the fins pop out and it automatically starts to sink immediately. So they were great for going in a low-level 10-degree dives, level degree dives, and we're carrying a gun this particular day. The gun worked 20% of the time. When it worked, it was great. When it didn't work, it was just like carrying an extra weight on the plane. And it was a tough time with that gun. But here we are, and there's no revetments right now, and we're wide open. But luckily, we didn't have any attacks on the aircraft itself. The Marines, they were in the squadron also at night, pulled guard duty. So they were out. They had a reacting force and everything else to ensure that we were not hit by sappers. These were Vietnamese that would come in with a backpack with a fuse on it, light the fuse, throw it, and then try to get out of there before all hell broke loose. There's Larry Bacon and myself. Larry worked for me, or maybe I worked for him sometimes. You're seeing a aircraft down there. It's very slow moving. That's an observation plane. And what they would do is they knew where the enemy were, and they would fire a rocket in there or drop a smoke bomb on the position, and from there they would tell us what heading to use, where to drop the bomb in reference to the smoke. And if the smoke was hit and we were coming in from a north to south region, they'd say hit the 1,200, couple hundred yards from my smoke dead ahead. So and then the second aircraft coming in would say from that last bomb hit, come right 200 feet or 100 yards and drop several. You can see the observation plane is over there on the right, and there's the bombs going off. We were using 30-degree dives on this, and this particular one, I think we're going up the side of a mountain, so it behooved us to come in at a steeper angle. We used to coin this VC in the trees because we never saw the VC in this heavy vegetation. Of course, they did down below. You can see the guy going in. He's climbing up the side of a mountain. But we were using 30-degree dives. 30-degree dives was we would come in at 3,000 feet above the ground. We would release our ordnance. Here we're coming around, and there's a hit that was made. I don't know if it was us, because you could see that we were in a heavy right turn, starboard turn when we were getting ready to come in. This is Dick Bardo, and Dick is telling Dan Mattiola to get up there and get in the airplane. How do I know him? Because Dan had a walk to him that was different from everybody else. We're going out on a what we call a TPQ-10. This is a straight and level flight, and the radar on the ground would put us on a line and draw and have us go out to a certain point and release our bombs, because they knew what the configuration of the bombs and what the aerodynamics were, so that they knew when to have the bombs released to hit the target that they were intending to hit. You're going to see them come off. Those are 500-pound straight bombs, fused in the front. That's Jack Jones, myself. We just come back. I don't know if it was on that particular mission or not. But anyway, Jack went for the University of North Carolina. He was a wrestling champion. Here we go with an A4 taking off on a crosswind runway. The crosswind you use when the winds are so bad on your standard runway that you had to use the crosswind. In an A4, the crosswind was short, so they had what they called a jet assist takeoff, JTO bottles that they had on the airplane, and dropped them at the end of the runway as they took off. But it gave them a kick. It was almost like on a carrier where you have your shot off the bow. Okay, this is along the coastline. Chulai was all along the coastline, and so most of if we're coming back from a bombing mission up on the DMZ, we usually came down the coastline. This one we're not. We're in an attack here, and it was along the one of the rivers, and you can see the river here. This is going up towards Quang Tri, up along the DMZ, and you saw the bridge there. At the end of the bridge, it was taken out. I'm sure it was taken out by the Viet Cong. When you got up towards the demilitarized zone, DMZ, you were always engaging the North Vietnamese Army, NVA as we called them. And this is coming back into Chulai. My father was always trying to get me to take some pictures of the landing in Chulai, landing period with the F-4. I didn't do too good a job, but periodically I did. That's a C-130, the airplane that you saw refueling our jets when we were airborne. It also was the Freedom Bird to get us out of country when we had to do something. That's Happy Bradshaw. He was the maintenance officer, and myself coming back from a flight. I worked for Harvey later on. That's Jay Whitus and Al Listwan. Al Listwan was was the ordnance officer in the squad, and Jay was a radar intercept officer. And this is more operations on the runway at Chulai, as you can see. Most of our missions were close air support. We did have missions up in North Vietnam, and when we went up to North Vietnam, we used a 45-degree angle, 5,000 release, and it was about 450 knots at release. If we were going faster than that, we released higher. In country, we used 30-degree dives, generally speaking. Close air support was 10-degree dives. At the end of my tour, we were doing 20-degree dives because we were getting a lot of machine gun fire in the aircraft. Those are C-121s and the C-130. Those are 123s used by special forces, and they'd be going up into the special forces areas. This is right off the coast of Chulai, and this is the fishing fleet. And you'll see some more pictures of the fishing fleet as we go along. When the fishing fleet was out, and they looked like they covered the sea. It was amazing to see it. This is bad weather, and we're in between bad weather here during the monsoon season. And as you can see there, the clouds and the tough weather we had to endure coming in. Those are towering cumulus. In other words, there's a thunderstorm underneath in that body of clouds. Here we are coming back in, and I believe we're coming into the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And if not, that's a river right there. And along these rivers was a lot of activity. You could always find activity, and I'm sure the small observation airplanes just relished that they could find it, because they could call in the sampans that they would bring down from wherever they were along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and it was always an interesting episode along there. But it gave the pilot a frame of reference. He could call it from my last hit, just go in about 50 feet and drop, right or left, however it was. This is along the coastline again, and we're in a dive, and you can see the altimeter. It's just going. We're in a 30-degree dive, and we're losing altitude in seconds, thousands of feet of altitude in seconds. Again, my father showing him that was an H-34. The H-34s were the Marine mainstay for bringing in helicopter troops and so forth, and that was in 1966. In late 66, 67, they came in with a CH-46, and you'll see that here shortly, I believe. Again, on the river, they're looking for targets. That's an old French fortification that the North Vietnamese had taken over, and you can see that we were bombing the hell out of that if we could, if they could find something. Here we are along the coastline again. That's the radar, and I'll tell you about that radar at a later time. Again, along the coastline, some of the fishing fleet, these are LSTs coming down the coast, and they were providing us with supplies and so forth. And this is a helicopter base at the foot of in the Da Nang area. And this is along the Da Nang coast going north up towards the demilitarized zone, the DMZ. As you can see it here, look at the hills and so forth. Those are some of the LSTs that I was telling you about. And there's one LST here I want to cite because Nan's father was in LSTs during the Second World War. Those are fishing nets that they have, and there's a ship that didn't quite make it. These fishing nets, you're going to see the fishing fleet out here shortly. There's an LST, there's another LST bringing in supplies. And here's the LST that Nan would appreciate seeing, because that's what her father was on during the Second World War as an officer. Now, we're west of Hue, going west into the area of Ashau and the Quezon, where they had a famous battle for about 2 months. The North Vietnamese tried to make into a French DMZ, which didn't. But you can see the weather along. You can see the rough terrain. Look at the clouds are down in the valleys there, and we're running along the ridge lines, and you can see how tough it is for the troops down there on the deck. Up here, we had an idea, an appreciation for what they were doing. But we're flying below these ridge lines, doing our business. There's the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This trail had spiders all over the place, but spider marks. As you can see, it'll going along here. You'll see pock marks where we've dropped bombs trying to get their trucks and so forth. There I am trying to take some pictures inside the cockpit. Again, the rough terrain of between DMZ and Da Nang, and then it kind of smooths out as you headed south towards Chu Lai, which was 50 miles south of Da Nang. And they had these fishing hamlets all along the coastline here. Again, my father trying to get me to make some more pictures of coming into landing. My father I took these pictures and sent them home. He'd send me film, and he never told me about if there was anything I needed to do as far as hold the camera better, more in a more steady way. But it was something else. And when I got to take these pictures in, these films in, he didn't tab them, so I had no idea which was in a chronological order. There's a Navy boat coming up with supplies. We're now in the city of Wei, and the city of Wei in '66 was pretty pristine, so to speak. There's a bridge coming across. It goes all the way up to the DMZ, and you can see the ships coming in unloading. This is the academy for the South Vietnamese Army. This area was decimated during the Tet Offensive 2 years later in 1968. It really took a hit, and the Marines took a hit and fought courageously along here, overwhelmed, and took care of business. You can see the pock markets as you're going up the coast along here. This is all man-made, courtesy of the U.S. Marine Corps for the most part. The Marines are operating in an area called the I-Corps District, and it encompassed just south of Chu Lai all the way up to the DMZ. Those are LSTs there unloading at the city of Wei. And you could see some of the aircraft that we had up there flying along. We flew in combat spread sometimes out to 1 mile. Here's a guy going, a plane going, an F-4 going in for an assault, an attack rather. And you can see the smoke rising, and you can see the small observation airplane coming by to assess what we had done. What we would do is that we'd go in, and as I told you, they'd mark the target, and we would have a north to south heading or right to east to west heading or in between. And after we had unloaded all our ordnance, they'd give us a battle damage assessment called BDA, and it'd tell us we either killed 3 or 4 people, the North Vietnamese or Viet Cong or whatever we had done. But it was, and then we'd take off out of there, and there'd possibly be another flight. This is done especially when they were in close contact with the North Vietnamese. And we had it many times where it was a fluid situation, and we almost bombed our own people because they got out ahead of the Viet Cong, and we were bombing them. So it was kind of shocking to see that happen. But it only one time that I experienced that situation. Here's the F-4 going out, and it's going to show you its capability to maneuver with ordnance on it. And this is where we lived. This is Dick Bardo's bunker. And this is the mess hall that they're building, and that's our officers club right there with the straw hooch. And these are the hooches that we had in Vietnam. Those are the major and above field grade living quarters. Here's our living quarters. There was Dick Bardo, Jack Jones, Leo Cullum, and myself, and then probably this is Dick's bunker. Now, we had one guy move in after Larry Bacon left. His name, I can't remember his name, but he was a big, ugly hunk, and we called him Baby Huey. And he asked me what Baby Huey, why was he called Baby Huey? Because I said he was a big effing duck. So he went down there and dug out the bunker and took the foot on the edge of the hut, sunk down, so it was tilted by the time I left. There's Leo Cullum. There, here I am, and you can see our wash quarters right there. We always used to have a pan with a gas. There's a napalm. There's a gun, and then napalm again. napalm was great. That really it really did a job on the Viet Cong and the NVA. It was a crowd pleaser. And what they're doing in this, they take the engines out, repair the engines. They take the struts off, and repair the struts, or replace them. They were quite ingenious in the way they did things with primitive conditions that we had. These are the guns that we had. Those are these Sidewinder missiles. They're heat-seeking missiles. You just release it, and it would go up at the enemy's engine. Fortunately or unfortunately, because we were fighters, we didn't get a chance to get up there and have it out with the MiGs like the Air Force did. And again, now we have revetments. We're all pretty well put together now down at Chulai, and you can see the activity going on. And this is in deep jungle foliage that this is taking place right now. And you can see there's a lot of activity going on along the river. And you can see the river goes back, way back into heading towards Laos. And we always had a target there. Here comes an F-4 in at a 30-degree dive. He's pulling out at 3,000 feet above the ground. He's releasing multiple bombs. And we'll see here shortly what his target was. There it is right there. And then you'd have the observation plane tell him how well he did. Here's an A4 with a different set of bombs that we didn't use, but they were I believe they were 750-pound pounders on an A4. Again, this is the plane that John McCain. Now you can see the fishing fleet out in the South China Sea. And this is right between Chulai and Da Nang. Look at as far as the eye can see, you see fishing vessels out there. There's J.J. Morin. J.J. was from Holy Cross, and a great guy. He's not. That's not an obscene gesture. He's telling the pilot to exercise his ailerons. They go back and forth, and the ailerons go up and down in the back. I think. Okay, we had the USO come in with some cheers for all the troops, and here she is with Leo Cullum and B.D. Cole. Again, in Chulai, there's Eddie Mag. Eddie came over when we were at Iwakuni. Great guy. It was a pleasure to work with him and fly with him. Here I am getting into the aircraft. Now we carried sidearms, but most of the time we took our pistols and put them in a survival vest because we had experience with the guys carrying their sidearm in their holster, strapped to it like Tom Mix or Royal Rogers or Gene Autry, going back a little bit. And the minute you ejected, that ripped off, the sidearm ripped off, and you were now without any type of defense in case you needed to either fire at somebody. And we carried traces because if we came down, then we fired these traces, and hopefully when we saw somebody trying to come in and rescue us, they would be able to pinpoint where we were. But for the most part, we carried our sidearms when we were on the street and so forth, or in the compound, but we never carried them while we were flying because, like I said, you didn't have them too long. There's a section of just telling you about it, and this is somewhat, I believe, a repeat, but that's all right. It's a good action of the F-4. Great airplane. I flew in the F-4 and the A-6, and I'll talk about that later in combat. And the F-4 had a special place in my heart. Here we are in close air support along the demilitarized zone. We're going after the North Vietnamese Army, the NVA, and we're and this is enemy in contact with our troops, and you can see that we're using snakes and nape, and very effective for close air support at this time. And as you can see, that taking off. That was Snake Eyes. when it's napalm, it just kind of sticks out there. There's napalm right there. It's the jelly coming out, and it just kind of sticks to everything and burns for a while. Sucks up the oxygen, too. And there's Marcia. This is at Point Mugu, California, and I'm putting this at the end because I wanted this is my legacy primarily for my children. And there's Chris at 3 years old, and there's Mike at 5.5, almost 6. And Mike was in kindergarten out there at Point Mugu, California. Point Mugu is where VX-4, which I'll talk about later, was located, and it was at the Pacific Missile Range. Great base, right at the base is in somewhat of a valley with a mountain that you just kind of got a glimpse of a short while ago. And there's Chris and there's Mike. 2 great kids, and they've done a great job as parents. God love them. And here I am. And I was trying to get them together. It was Easter. And we were taking them out to the officers club. They're going to have an Easter hunt, egg hunt rather. And we're trying to keep them calmed down a little bit so they could get there without killing one another. And this is Masha in our Buick. And there she is. And this is the officers club. And there's going to be another picture here of them. I changed film, I guess. I did something here. But maybe there they are. Here they are out at the egg roll. And Marsha's trying to get Chris. He's all frustrated because he can't find an egg. Of course, Mike's sucking them all up. Of course, all the kids his age were sucking them up, and Chris couldn't get them. This is Diane Moritz. Her husband, Doug, got out, and he went to the University of North Carolina to get his law degree. And I haven't seen them in 50 years. But this is the beach at Point Mugu, and they had these little cottages down there that you could rent out, and for a week or so. And there's a classic coming through the rock. That's it. The highway is right along the foot of that mountain there, and you see that a lot when they're advertising cars. They're coming up the coast of the California coast, and they've got this little rock out on the side. Well, that was right in the Point Mugu area. Those are the huts I was telling you about that you could rent out. And the sailors and so forth it was a great time for them, to say the least. Okay, this right here, they were training dolphins to go after to lay mines or go after mines. I'm not sure which. And they had this wharf out there that they used to get out to them, but. You can see some of the main buildings that they use in the testing and evaluation, the radar sites and so forth. Hey, Chris found one. Yeah, he did. Good for you, Chris. You can throw it at your brother when you get home. But anyway, the video you have just seen was the baseline that served me well in my succeeding assignments throughout my unusual career. Leaving Vietnam in 1967, I was assigned to the Navy's Air Test and Evaluation Squadron 4. Coined VX-4. VX-4 was the precursor of what is now the Navy's Top Gun school. Remember Tom Cruise in the movie Top Gun? VX-4 developed the Navy's tactics to defeat fighter aircraft that our Vietnamese enemy employed. VX-4 was organized around fighter jocks, not a place for a buttercup mentality. Since my call sign in Marine Fighter Attack Squadron 542 was Hostile Man, I was well received in spite of being a Marine. From VX-4, I learned and refined how fighter tactics were employed. As an example, it shows Bill Browning and I preparing to fly a high-altitude intercept against a Beaumark missile. Because I was in charge of their avionics branch, I was exposed to learning about the latest updates in F-4 Phantom aircraft radar improvements. I also had the opportunity to be on the ground floor in flight testing the latest surface-to-air missile SAM-2 evasive tactical fighter maneuvers, as well as measuring the capability of our defensive electronic countermeasures equipment carried on board the F-4. It would serve me well in my next assignment. After 2 years in VX-4 and away from combat, I retraced my steps to my second tour into Marine Fighter Attack Squadron 542 in late November 1969 in Da Nang, Vietnam. I started flying the F-4 in early December. We were flying combat escort, flak suppression missions in northern Laos and North Vietnam. The monsoon season in 1969 was terrible. All flights to Da Nang were flown using instruments with a final radar pickup from Da Nang Ground Control Approach, GCA. On my ninth hop, Jack Consalvo and I were returning from an escort mission in Laos, low on fuel. We called for an immediate vector to Da Nang Air Base. Once vectored, we lost our radios and all our navigation equipment in heavy rain and zero visibility. This particular aircraft had an improved radar avionics, so we continued our approach with minimum fuel using our airborne radar. I found the significant radar landmarks to navigate through the Hai Van Pass, descending to 1,500 feet at 5 miles in the Da Nang Harbor Basin, down to 1 mile at 300 feet, using the runway heading, which enabled me to radar detect 2 ponds seen on my previous 8 Da Nang approaches, which was 1 mile north of the runway, and I made final adjustments to our heading of 170 degrees to the runway. The last mile to ground zero, estimated at 24 seconds. At 27 seconds, we made visual contact at 75 feet above the ground and 100 feet from the approach end of the runway. The plane flamed out on touchdown. We dropped our tailhook and caught the arresting gear at the end of the runway. Several nights later, on a night escort mission in Laos and North Vietnam, I employed VX-4 tactics to evade a SAM fired at us while still providing flak suppression in the Bang Karai Pass. All my life-saving experiences in this tour were the product of my VX-4 assignment. I flew 66 missions in the 2 months I was assigned to Marine Fighter Attack Squadron 542. Lieutenant Colonel Keith Smith was my F-4 squadron commander in Marine Fighter Attack Squadron 542. He was so impressed with my aviation skills that I was reassigned in Da Nang to an A-6 Intruder Squadron, Marine All-Weather Attack Squadron 225, without any formal training in late January 1970, as 542 was returning to the States. He noted in my departure evaluation that I was fearless in combat. Within 3 weeks of A-6 informal training, I was designated a bombardier navigator and returned to North Vietnam, where I went on to fly 166 combat missions. Besides flying, I became the squadron aircraft maintenance officer for 15 A-6s. This is an unusual assignment for a junior captain. I was the only naval flight officer to transition from F-4s to A-6s in Vietnam without any formal training. On my 10th beacon bombing mission in South Vietnam, flying with 28 500-pound bombs in severe weather conditions, I provided bombing rescue for a fire support base that was about to be overrun. This mission was the closest bombing mission as far as beacon bombing ever to be accomplished at that time. My total combat missions on my second tour were 232 flights in the F-4 and the A-6. I was reassigned out of Vietnam to Naval Air Test Center, Patuxent River, Maryland, in the Weapons Systems Test Division. As the project officer, I conducted developmental testing and evaluation for the A-6, the F-4, and eventually the F-14 Tomcat aircraft's weapon systems. Because of my weapon systems testing successes with the F-14, I was named the Marine Corps Flight Officer of the Year in 1974. I again successfully employed experience and skills to achieve this recognition and mission success. Later on, I was assigned as a United Nations military observer in 1976 and 1977 in Lebanon during the Civil War. In this role as an observer, my job was to watch and report Arabs killing one another, really. On one occasion, I was in a situation where I had to extract myself and a Finnish Air Force officer underwater from a drowned Wagoneer. In trying to avoid a mortar attack on a village, we detoured around the insurgent activity to pick up the mountain donkey trail in the Mount Herman area that I had previously used. We hit a submerged boulder in driving over the crest of the hill, which took control of my vehicle as I lost steering control and drove us over a 15-foot cliff. We landed upside down in a pond and sank. The Finnish officer was locked in his seat. I fortunately released him and pulled him out. However, in doing so, I was kicked by him back into the cabin and sank with the Wagoneer. Mustering the kryptonite in my Superman body, I pulled myself out of the vehicle under 10 feet of water. Raimo Rastus, the Finnish Air Force officer, lived to fly several more years and for Finland. The Marine Corps later recognized this heroic achievement. Following that boring assignment in Lebanon, I reacquainted myself with life back at Cherry Point, North Carolina. With hard work and luck, achieved a flying command which I dearly desired. I took over a Marine All-Weather Attack Training Squadron 202 in 1981 from an A6 Squadron commander, relieved for cause. In 2 years of command, I met and exceeded all demands. My last Marine Corps adventure. Retiring from the Marine Corps, I took over a position as a business manager at a Catholic girls' school in 1992. Here I met one of the school's teachers, Mrs. Marion Canny. She told me that her husband, Major John Canny, a fighter pilot in World War II, had been killed at the Chosin Reservoir in North Korea while serving as an infantry battalion executive officer for the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment, and was buried at the Chosin Reservoir. She told me he had posthumously been promoted to lieutenant colonel, but she never received his commission. Here are the long, frustrating steps I climbed in 5 years to get him promoted. John was killed at Udamni, North Korea, a suburb of the Chosin Reservoir, in November 28, 1950. He was selected for promotion by the Marine Corps after 30 November 1950. His name was expunged by the Marine Corps after the promotion list was approved by the President Truman. Mrs. Canny received letters of condolence in 1950, remarking that John's name is at the top of the promotion board list. In her 2 attempted meetings in a period of 40 years with the congressional representatives by Mrs. Canny to uncover why John had never been promoted, she was essentially told his name never went before the selection board. In the summer of 1951, a year later, after John's death, at Marine Barracks in Washington, D.C., Mrs. Canny received John's posthumous Navy Cross Award for John's unselfish, extraordinary bravery the night he was killed. This is the second highest award next to the Medal of Honor. I started my research in the spring of 1992. I found his death certificate, but discovered all his records, official records, according to the Marine Corps, were irrevocably lost. By chance in the summer of 1992, I talked to Mrs. Canny's brother-in-law, who was in his attic throwing away old documents. He was a Navy lawyer at the time of John's death. He provided me the breakthrough All-Navy 148 message. He had just tossed this message into the trash. The message announced to the Navy and the Marine Corps that John Canny had been selected for promotion to lieutenant colonel. Hello. I showed the All-Navy message to now Marine Lieutenant General Keith Smith. He responded, "God wants this to happen." I submitted the All-Navy document to the Board of Correction Naval Records. They could not overrule the Senate's 1950 approval, which did not reflect John Canny's name. I contacted the President Truman Library in Independence, Missouri in the summer of 1993. They found the promotion board's proceedings, which detailed the actions of the Marine Corps Promotion Board, which the President approved. John's name was first on the list. I submitted the details to the Marine Corps Judge Advocate General. The Judge Advocate General stated, John Canny has been mistakenly promoted, and it was expunged in accordance with Title 10 of the U.S. Code. No further Marine official notice was necessary. I stopped the promotion efforts with the Judge Advocate General's stiff-arm proclamation to John Canny's promotion in the spring of 1994. I renewed my efforts in the spring of 1995. I contacted Senator John Warner, who contacted the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps responded, "Show me the board's promotion list approved by the President, and we'll recommend John be promoted." In the December of 1995, the Commandant of the Marine Corps submitted to the Navy Secretary his approved recommendation, and the Navy Secretary then submitted it to the Secretary of Defense. The Office of General Counsel and the Secretary of Defense's office recommended disapproval. Senator John Glenn, a retired Marine aviator and astronaut, successfully interceded. President Clinton approved the promotion, and the Senate subsequently approved the promotion in the summer of 1996. John Canny was promoted by the Commandant of the Marine Corps to Lieutenant Colonel in June 1997 in a parade at 8th and 9 Marine Barracks in Washington, D.C. Mrs. Canny, after 47 years, received her husband's posthumous promotion thanks to the supporting efforts of Frank Matursky of the Chosen Few organization and my persistence. Thank you, God. The end. It was a long career with many twists and turns. I exceeded beyond my wildest dreams, concluding my Marine career as a colonel. This DVD is my legacy gift to my friends and loved ones. Thanks.